Good evening. Welcome to another episode of True Story Live. Tonight's guest, his name is Levi, and the topic for tonight, or the title for tonight's broadcast, is Return to Tradition. So we'll be excited to talk to him in just a minute. I'll introduce myself. I'm the host of the broadcast. My name is Jason Cripps, and this is part of the new format that we've changed. For those of you that have listened in the past, this is let's see, we did two, three. I think we've done three, four episodes in total with the new format. It seems to be working all right. People are listening. We don't have as many people in the chat as we used to sometimes, but we expect that to change. I know when you change formats, it does sometimes take time for people to come around, especially when it's as different as this is. But I say different. This is what I wanted from the beginning, and I'm, as I've said before, very happy with the broadcasts we've done and the conversations we've had and people we've met along the way. But I'm very excited about this new format and going back to the original thought of having people tell their true stories live. And I've enjoyed it. I'm continuing to enjoy it, and I'm sure we're going to enjoy Levi's story tonight. So also with us is Glenn, our friend from Australia. Well, both of them are from Australia, actually. So I'm the Yank, so to speak. Do you call Americans Yanks up there or over there?
No,
No.
not really. That's a World War II type
Yeah,
expression.
right. Yeah. Well, here they would call me in the South. They would call me a damn Yankee because the difference between a Yankee and a damn Yankee. Yankee comes to visit, then he leaves again. And the damn Yankee stays. That's the joke here in the South Carolina. But anyway, I'm excited to hear Levi's story. Also with us, she's not on the screen, but she'll be in the chat. There she is, right there. My wonderful wife, Jennifer. Her stomach's a little upset tonight, and so she may not come on the panel, but she'll be in the chat to make comments and ask questions. So we'll go with that tonight. So I hope that she feels better. Also, I'll just say a quick hello to Celine, who was the first in the chat, other than Jennifer. And in the old format, when people popped in the chat, we would stop and say hello to them. Welcome them and things like that. So just please understand that while we're in the middle of a story, I'm not going to do that. If there's a stopping point and I see a couple people in the chat that I want to say hello to, I will do that. So please don't take it personally. I do see people that come in, so I may mention in the chat. I might say hello to you that way, but I don't want to interrupt any person's story. It's very important to hear what they have to say, at least for me. And we want to be respectful. Just a very different way of doing things when it was open forum and we had a panel. It's really easy to stop and just say hello to people. So there's that. I also see our friend Melted Zone popped in the chat. So before we get started, we'll say hello to him. Thank you for coming by. Melted Zone has been a friend of the channel for a long time. And he had mentioned that he would like to tell his story. So we may have him on here as well at some point. And before we get started, most of the stories that we've had so far are about deconstruction. And as Glenn mentioned at the beginning, we're not sticking ourselves or painting ourselves into a corner when it comes to stories. We're open to all kinds of stories as long as they're true. And so we'll kind of prove that tonight with Levi's story. Maybe a very different than what we've done so far in the new format. But I'm very excited, as I mentioned earlier, to hear what he has to say. So Glenn, take a minute and say hello to people, or if you have any opening comments, please make them.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Well, this is an interesting one because we've had three stories prior to this one, which have been essentially deconstruction, about people searching to find different ways and have many thoughts and how things potentially or probably have not been working for them. But tonight we're sort of branching out with a different perspective, and this relates to the church group that I've been sort of attending, and hopefully as an atheist I've got a pretty unbiased view because I can just sit back and smell the roses and be an observer. But what I've seen is people generally who don't have some of the issues that have been brought up by the three previous guests, including yourself, Chris, which was
Sure.
one. So,
Sure.
yeah, I'm a little bit mystified as to how, one group of people are finding, dissociation with their religion, so to speak, and yet on the other hand, I'm seeing people who are so comfortable with it and presenting a very constructive attitude towards the community in general, and to my mind, doing a great job. So, yeah, it's really my pleasure to introduce Levi to the broadcast, and I'll be looking forward to getting that other perspective for sure. So that's it.
Thank you, Glenn. Perfect. And with that, let's hear from Levi. Levi, welcome to the broadcast tonight. We appreciate you being here. And just say hello to the people, if you would, for a sec.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Jason, for having me on, and thank you to Glenn for the invite. I'm happy to be here, and yeah, keen to chat.
Yes, awesome. So let's just get started. And what I've asked everyone at the beginning to do, we're kind of separating the three parts, and we want it to be organic. So if it doesn't match the three parts, that's fine. But Glenn had an idea of starting out with just kind of the your history or background a little bit, and then if you can get into whatever faith you're from, and in this case, I don't want to make assumptions, but I believe it's Christianity that we're going to be talking about a little bit, and describing how you first were introduced to Christianity and how that affected your early life, and now with the other stories, the third part would be talking about deconstruction. Now, that may not be the case with you, but for you, the third part would be where you're at now. So it's a progression of from the background to how you came into your particular beliefs, and then how they've changed where you're at now with your beliefs and things like that. And you can start anytime you want. So if you can tell listeners as much as you feel comfortable, where you were born, what your family life was like, do you live in the same town that you grew up in, and things like that, and your early life, and go from there. And also, Glenn will feel free to pop in if he has a question. Also, Jen may have some questions. She's in the chat, but I'll watch for questions from the audience. And as I mentioned, I don't want to interrupt you to ask questions, but when there's a stopping point, if there's a question that someone has put up in the chat, I will politely ask you and see if you want to answer that question. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be. If there's good questions come up, I'm happy to pause and answer them. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So where were you born, Levi? Where are you from originally?
Yes. So yeah, I guess my life is not particularly interesting, but but I was born in rural New South Wales. That's one of the states in Australia, and
Sure.
I still grew up. I still live in the area that I grew up in. Moved around from house to house here or there, but still in the same area. Yeah, and grew up in a Christian family, like many other Christians. Quite a common story.
Sure.
And yeah, so I grew up in a Christian family, and that's kind of that would be how God reached me and brought me to faith, would be through family and friends as well. Christian community growing up has been a very positive impact, and formative as well.
Yeah. Do you mind saying it was a particular denomination or segment of Christianity that your parents were, and then would you say that you've kind of stayed in that or different denomination, or talk a little bit about that if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully this is where my story gets a bit more interesting.
Okay.
I've got the standard testimony of tell us about your testimony. I grew up in a Christian family, and that's been heard 100 times.
Sure.
But it's it's good because that's how God. I think it's often how God works. It's just through family. And so yeah, my parents moved out to this area shortly after they were married, and so I was born about a year after they moved out here, I believe. And they kind of went to, I think, a Pentecostal church at first, and then
Oh,
a bit involved in a local Anglican church as well.
wow.
Kind of here or there. They were baptized together in one of the local Pentecostal churches.
Okay.
And yeah, so growing up, always Christianity was just assumed, right? Like belief in God, that's something didn't doubt, and that was just every day. This was part of everyday life, right? It was there was never a moment in my childhood where I doubted that. And I think I could say the same for my siblings. But in regards to a sense of we belong to this particular group or denomination, never had that for my whole entire childhood.
Really? That is interesting.
Until I became an adult, where I began to look into that myself.
Okay.
It was really where I would find a sense of, okay, which group do I belong to? But growing up, we were just, broadly just Christian, I suppose you could say, just evangelical in a sense. But with lots of, because my parents both they met in an Anglican church in Sydney. So they both have Anglican like background. And then they were part of a Pentecostal church out here for a little while I was growing up. And then in town, we moved from a property into town, and we stopped going to church for a while. Like when I don't actually ever remember going to church much as a little kid.
Okay.
Which is, we were Christian family. My parents
Right.
they never stopped believing in God, but then for a while growing up, we didn't really go to church much. And my main church life would have been, as a kid, would have actually been going to a friend's house church. Some really good friends of mine who are still my closest friends today, or their families, they'd run a house church. They've been doing it for years. So that was kind of my earliest memories of church, like people gathering together to worship God, to worship, the Christian God, Jesus.
Yeah.
Would have been at my friend's place at their house church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just real quick. So you said your parents grew up Anglican and then they joined Pentecostal. Now I could be wrong, because here in the States, there's quite a difference between Anglican and Pentecostal. Is it different in your area?
That's a good question. It depends on which one you go to, which church you go to.
Oh, sure. Okay.
In certain, it depends on the regions, but typically it would be like it is in the US. Pentecostals and Anglicans look very different. But you get some Anglican churches that are much more not as traditional and would be more evangelical, and some of them even more like charismatic in their expression of worship. They would some of them look just like a Pentecostal church would look like on a Sunday morning, where
interesting.
The minister, he's not wearing a dog collar or any robes or anything. He's just wearing normal clothes. There might be a worship band up on stage, and there might be lights and maybe a bit of smoke music. You get that in some Anglican churches too. But typically that's not what it looks like across the whole country.
Sure.
You have many expressions of traditional worship as well.
Okay.
But yeah, I think particularly with where my parents came from Sydney. Sydney's more a evangelical a diocese in the Australian Anglican Church.
Okay. Now I'm not saying this, Levi, but I've heard of a lot of people, and their criticism of Christianity is that, and not just Christianity, any religion really, is that you believe what you grew up in. So you mentioned that
Mm.
you grew up in a Christian family.
Yeah.
Would you agree or disagree with that, or I suppose there's room to somewhat agree or disagree, but where do you stand with that? If someone said that to you, how would you respond to that?
I would say yes.
Oh,
And that's not a bad. I would say yes, that's correct, and it's not a bad thing. Because often
yeah,
when people say that, they just automatically assume that that's a problem.
yeah,
But that's true for everyone, and that's true for children. As we grow up, we're formed by those around us,
yeah,
by parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and then our friends' parents as well. Like adults, we have to be formed. Children are going to be influenced by those around them.
yeah.
So it's just part of life.
Sure. It's interesting because I used to react when people would say that. Yeah, it's as if they're implying, well, the only reason you believe in the first place is because you grew up in a family that believes.
Mm,
If you'd been born in India, you'd be any number of religions that came out of that region. It'd be Hindu or Muslim or whatever. And I
mm.
I didn't identify with that at all back then. I just think it's an interesting thing that people think. But I loved your answer. Don't seem to have an issue with it. You seem to kind of agree with that as a premise. I like how you said that. Children need to be. I think you said formed. Um, is that accurate? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. The
Yeah.
idea that and you hope we see that, right? Like you hope it's there's going to be positive formation, right?
Yeah. Positive. Right.
Yeah. That's what should be the case.
Okay.
But yeah, it is it is it's a good question to ask, I think,
Sure.
because yeah, like you said, or if you were born in India, you might be a Hindu.
Right.
But there does come a point in every Christian's life, or whatever religion you are, that you're raised in, where you will then test the truth claims of that religion for yourself.
Yes. Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's okay to be raised in a religious environment, and then and it's also good for then as an adult or when you're older to test that and to know for yourself that what you've been raised in is true.
Yeah. So you
So
mentioned.
sorry, excuse me,
Oh, go
Levi.
ahead, please, Glenn.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
No.
when I'd like to hear in context of down the line or whenever, is how you tested that for
Yes.
yourself.
Yeah. I definitely love to share that. And that's probably relevant, I suppose, to the later part of the discussion. Hey, where I talk about kind of
Yes.
study, research, and then the third section. Correct?
Well,
Yes.
that's fine, but it like I said, I do want it to be organic. So if you can change it up any way you want, Levi, it's going to be a free flowing conversation. All I did was mention Glenn's idea for having some kind of structure. So please feel free to answer his question now, and then you can go back to something else if you'd like.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess going back to before, I was talking about, having no real denomination, like like an identity in a denomination, right? You say, non-denominational, just broadly speaking, just a Christian. And then it wasn't until my teens where I began to. I think this is common for many people who grew up in a Christian family. It's in their teens where they begin to, doubt the faith and
Yeah.
have all these questions because it's
Yeah.
a crazy time in your life because you're growing up, going through puberty, becoming an adult, all that stuff. And
Trying to be
you struggle with all
autonomous.
these. That's it, and
Yeah.
all these existential questions suddenly rear their heads, and you got to deal with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was interesting. 'Cause I think for a little while in my late, kind of like about 16, was when I was dealing with a lot of the intellectual questions, like a lot of. I was really interested in apologetics.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
You know, probably heard of people like William Lane Craig and a lot of the big guys on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they debate and have discussions with atheist YouTubers.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yeah, and so back then, this would have been what 2000 and kind of 2015 to 2017. You know, that was quite a big thing on the internet.
Oh, sure. Still is. There are still
is, yeah.
debates between atheists and Christians. I've watched a lot of them.
Yeah. It's a big scene on YouTube. Hey.
Yeah.
So I was kind of really into that, but what I realized retrospectively, looking back on that, is my heart wasn't in it. It was all just like, okay, I'm wrestling with these with my head, right? Like I'm wrestling with these questions. What's true? Correct questions like, can that one about God? Can he create a rock so big that he can't lift it? Stuff like that, which I think is so. I'll be honest, like I think it's really silly now. But at the time when I hear that, I'm like, oh, how do I? This atheist, they're throwing these hardball questions. How do we answer this stuff?
Yeah.
But I had that outward appearance of being concerned about it, but in my heart, I wasn't living like a Christian. I wasn't taking the teachings of Jesus very seriously at all.
Okay.
And it was all just like I was just concerned with head knowledge, with theory, but that all changed. And not to say that stuff's bad. It's good to have those discussions. That's important. Apologetics is important.
Oh, sure. Sure.
But that's only a part of it, right?
Right. I would agree.
So it was when I was about 17, where we had, so my family, we lived in town for a bit. We moved out to a property, really great property, still live there today. We moved out there 2015. And we built a cabin there. So lived in the cabin. It was really quite a fun childhood.
Sure.
On this property in a cabin.
Yeah.
But unfortunately in 2018, sorry.
I was just going to say, what younger person doesn't like a cabin, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. It was a lot of fun, growing up in a cabin. And we go bow hunting, had quad bikes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Dad would go shooting and show us how to, use a gun and all this kind of stuff. Really just the moving out to the property and those years there in that property was great. Lots of great childhood memories. And so then at 2018, we had just a freak house fire.
Oh,
and we lost that cabin that we lived in. It burnt down. So it was just some hot coals. The fireplace door wasn't closed properly. Hot coals fell out, and that was just a freak, just a random thing. And the house is gone in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so we've been living out there for a few years. And in that process, we'd moved most of our things from our house in town out to this property, right? And so we lost mostly everything. Many of our personal belongings and everything. And so amazingly, no one, we were all fine. And we have a lot of animals as well. We lost a couple cats, sadly, but really despite in terms of lives lost, it was good that, praise be to God, nothing like it wasn't too bad. So but just losing your home and all these things,
it's traumatic.
in 20 minutes, right? It really shook us all.
Sure it would.
And and dealing with that, like in those few days afterwards, those weeks afterwards, that was really really tough for the whole family.
Yeah.
Thankfully, our neighbors very kindly. There's a house just in the neighboring property to us where we lived in for a few months afterwards. So we moved into that house for a little bit with just really the clothes, the clothes on our back and all these, dozens of animals that we had,
Yeah.
like chickens, dogs, a goat, birds, all kinds of things, a little zoo, and then our big family as well. So at the time I had four. I've got 5 siblings now, but at the time I had 4. Sibling number 5 hadn't been born yet.
Oh, okay.
I believe. Yes. So we may have just been a bub. I don't quite remember. No, he was born. He was just little though. Yeah. So 5 siblings. So there's 6 of us. So a family of 8. So a family of 8. All these animals, just the clothes on our back, really.
Yeah.
And so dealing with that, that aftermath of that shock was a big thing for all of us, and we all dealt with it in different ways, of course, and then tried to deal with it together as a family.
Sure.
And then what helped, the big impact it had on me was realizing all that, head knowledge and all that theory and apologetics. It was all useless. It was like, okay, that's not important. Who do I trust in this difficult time, really hard time?
Yeah.
God has made these promises to those who believe in him, who put their faith in him.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to depend on God. I'm going to actually start trusting him. I'm going to actually start praying to him, asking God to help, really. Just, God, what do we do here? And so that whole experience actually taught me to really actually just depend on God.
Okay.
And through that, all those doubts and stuff about him being real and his existence they were all irrelevant. It was like that didn't matter anymore.
Right.
I knew, this is sure, you could say it's subjective. But from that point, after from what I could see, how God was at work, and how he changed me and helped, support me and through that whole process, really helped show me, okay, God is real. The promises that he made, he keeps his promises to his people.
Sure.
And so that's really when I started taking Christianity seriously. So that was the whole moment where, okay, I'm going to take this thing seriously. I called out to God, and God answered, and he says, I'm here. I can be depended upon. You and your family can trust in me and find comfort and peace despite what you're going through.
Sure.
So that was really the big moment for me where I took the faith seriously. Yeah.
And about how long ago was that, Levi, if you don't mind saying?
So that was 2018. So about 6 years ago. It was it was June 2018. Yeah.
Okay.
It was like a couple of weeks after my birthday or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point that you're making, though, because I have witnessed a lot of people within Christianity. They're on the side that you were on, and they don't ever seem to come out of that place. I thought it was great that you got to this place of self-analyzing or introspection enough to come to the point of realizing that you have all this head knowledge, but it's beside the point if you're not following what Jesus said. Now, that's my own words. That's my interpretation of what you're saying. But what did you really believe? It sounded like that's the kinds of questions you're asking yourself. Do I really believe this or not?
Yes, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Well, knowledge. there's that verse about, knowledge just puffing up.
Puffs
Right?
up,
If it's
yeah.
just knowledge, but you don't, knowledge is important. It's
Sure.
good to be knowledgeable. There's so much knowledge out there that God is, God wants us to learn about Him and about His creation, to study these things and to be well versed in it.
Yeah.
And
sure.
most importantly, He wants us to be knowledgeable about His teaching in Scripture, right? What Jesus taught us.
Right.
But we can, if we know it all, and give all the right answers, but don't believe it in our hearts, well, then it's useless. Right? We haven't.
Right.
Well, it's no good for us. It's
Right.
not going to help us out if we know all the right answers but don't actually practice it in our daily life.
Mm-hmm. I think Paul addressed that pretty well too. About
that's it. He did. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. So you mentioned earlier about doubt. You were saying that you haven't had this time of doubt. This might be a good time to ask you, because I'm very curious to know, obviously within Christianity, the way that they treat doubt, at least from my perspective. Now, where you are could be very different, and I think some of the changes may be just the West versus the rest of the world. I don't know. But when people doubt, it seems like it's the worst thing in the world. They even use scripture to say, well, the idea of it's like the man that built his house on the sand. They use that to say that's, if you're doubting, if you don't have just the strong faith. I'm curious what you think about a person that has doubts, because I have a very different, maybe a different perspective on when someone has doubts, and how they deal with it, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on sometimes doubt can come, like the source of that doubt can come from different places.
Sure.
I think because in the Bible you do see many expressions, I guess you could say, of doubt, of like despair and exasperation, people crying out to God.
Yeah.
And like you have the book of Job and stuff like that, right? People where Job is crying out to God and struggling with that. I think, and then other times I think you might have doubt. There can be times of doubt where it is dangerous to doubt, because it's coming from a lack of faith and a lack of trust in God.
Sure.
Because he's shown himself to be trustworthy, but from a place of sin, you're not trusting in him. But then other times, I think, doubt, we can't help it but doubt, because that's part of human nature. Is humans, we're fragile creatures, really.
Sure.
And our minds aren't always stable. We're fallen beings, and even when we've been redeemed by Christ and we've come to faith, and we're transformed, right? We're a new creation, but we're still gonna have moments of doubt.
Yeah.
And I think that's you shouldn't come down hard and heavy on someone when they express doubt straight
Agreed.
away. You need
Agreed.
to, and this is part of like counseling people and being pastoral, right? Is you will sit down with them, talk with them, and help them work through it, because that happens to all of us. Because it's, like I said, part of our nature. So you need to sit down and just work through it with people, and then find out where that doubt is. Like, what's the source of that doubt? Sometimes you trace it, and it's doubt can actually, it appears on the surface as doubt, but it's coming from some place of sin. Like there's a sin in that person's life, right? It's like, okay, that's not good. We need to address that. This is your real problem. Right. But then other times, doubt is really just genuine, because this person is having a difficult time in life, and they're struggling to see where God is in their life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're struggling to see, oh, God's made these promises, but I can't see that in my life. Can you help me, please? I'm struggling. My faith in God is being tested.
Yeah.
So I think in that case, you really need to, with doubt, you really got to be pastoral about it and counsel people and be patient and gentle with it.
Levi,
Yeah.
just a quick one. Does the church that you're in enact what you said, being compassionate about when someone has doubt? So I've heard on YouTube when some people come up with these doubt ideas, they get taken to the bottom of the pit with criticism.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, conversely, how does your church approach someone in the congregation or from anywhere really who comes and says, I have doubts about about God, etc. So how does it work?
That's it. Yeah, thanks, Glenn. It's tricky. I would say it's tricky when I don't know of any cases of that happening here at my church. So I can't give like, okay, here's this has happened and here's how we've dealt with it. Here's how we responded to this person who had doubt. But what I can say is I'm really, really, really positive that we would respond in the way in which I described before, where we just by I know these people at my church. I know that if one of this church is a family, right? It's a spiritual family for brothers and sisters. So if someone came forward and confided in us about doubt that they're experiencing with its faith or belief in God, I just know for sure that we would pray for that person there in that moment.
Sure.
And help them work through this.
Yeah.
And it would, no way would it be, we'd be condemning them right off the bat. That's just not, that should never be how it is.
No, I agree. That's not Christ-like. I would agree that the way that you put it, I would love it if that was more widespread. I'm only one person, but my observation is that when people doubt, there's a couple different reactions, but the first one usually is, oh, are you reading your Bible enough? That seems to be the go-to for a lot of pastors and even lay people, just people in the church, when they have someone come to them and say, hey, man, I'm really struggling with my faith, or I really have a lot of questions, and I don't see having questions as being necessarily the same as doubt, but it gets thrown in the same category. Discouraged from asking questions, discouraging a person from out of a place of doubt, if that's the case, almost guilting and shaming the person. Well, you just need to have faith, brother, rather than, as you said, sitting down with them, praying with them, walking through it with them, and not a place of condemnation. And if we look at the example of Jesus, which, Christianity is supposedly supposed to follow Christ's teachings, Christ's words, and his life should be an example, in my opinion. And the way he handled doubt, you have a couple instances in scripture where someone doubted, and he would say, like, oh, ye of little faith, but he didn't then not heal the person or not do what they were asking him to do. To me, there's a love and a compassion. Of course, people aren't the Son of God, right? I get that. But if he's the model, I would like to see more of the compassion that he had for people in Christianity in general. And it really may come down to this, Levi. It really may be that your region, where the church that you're involved with and the people there just may be very different than a lot of the churches in the West. And I'm not saying that how could I even know that every single church in America is horrible. I'm not making a claim like that. I don't know that that's true. For instance, my grandparents' church, they're people just like everybody else. But they were, in my childhood, I wasn't aware of denominational differences either. Because, we went to a Baptist church. My grandparents were Baptist. And I was very delighted to go to church. I wasn't afraid of it. I had friends there. I was kind of occasionally discouraged from asking questions. Like if Cain, I'm sure you've heard all this, but I asked the question. I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and I asked the Sunday school teacher about, oh, wait a minute. So if Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and at that time they were the only children that are listed in Scripture, and then Cain kills his brother and then moves off to another place, and he gets married and builds a town. And also him being afraid of the mark that God, or not the mark, but the curse that God put on him, that, he said, well, people are going to see me and kill me, and he said, no, I'll put a mark on you that nobody kills you. And if they do, I'll get them, asking that question. It's just an example of a question that comes up for a child that's introspective and likes to ask questions. But discouragement from asking more questions, discouragement from someone that's really dealing with doubt, and they're coming to someone in the church, whether it be a pastor or someone they consider a friend, and the people just throw a scripture verse at them and say, oh, you need to read your Bible more. And maybe that's true. Maybe the person does need to read your Bible more. Or maybe it's, as you mentioned, it could be sin is the issue for them, and it's not that they're really genuinely asking questions, and they're having doubts that come out of the questions not being answered. I don't know. I don't know if that's more of a statement or a question to you, Levi. I just think the way you described it is beautiful, and the way Glenn talks about the particular church, it's very encouraging. That at least in that region, it seems like the people are very approachable. They don't seem to be, condemning, at least for someone like Glenn, who professes that he's an atheist, and right from the jump, and says, hey, I don't believe any of this, but he's put himself in a position to get to know people. And so sometimes in the previous format, when he would hear Jen or myself talk about what we've experienced here in the West, being within Christianity and YouTube and all of that, it just seems very different than what we're used to. And that's kind of what he's saying. It's like, wait a minute, something's not right here. What they're saying on YouTube, what they're saying on the broadcast, doesn't match up with what he's witnessing in person in your area. What do you think about that? Do you think it? I don't want to derail anything. I just am wondering if you have an opinion on that. Do you think that it's just a difference between your region, your area, your country, as opposed to the West? I don't know if you know much about how things are here within Christianity, or I don't know.
Yeah. Where do you start? Yeah, I think one thing, a funny thing is, so a bit of a lighthearted comment, is the internet doesn't always reflect real life. You can see all sorts of horrible people expressing their views online.
Oh yeah.
And representing, like, they'll claim, I represent Christianity, and then they'll say some really shocking things, and then they'll get like thousands of views, and everyone. And if you're online a lot, which I'll be honest, I am too much, you begin to think, oh no, it's not looking so good for Christianity. There aren't many Christians following Jesus' teachings.
Exactly. That's true.
Right. But what helps, you've got to be grounded, I think, and why finding a local church has been so good for me, and committing myself to it, is it grounds you in, okay, because the internet's like, everyone can interact with each other, right? You can interact with the whole world online.
Yeah.
I can interact with a Christian in the US, like I am right now, right?
Sure.
But outside of the internet, I can't really, in my daily life, I can't really do that. I interact with people in my town, in my community. These are the people that this is the area I've been placed in. This is where God's put me.
Mm-hmm.
It's where God has put all these other people too. And then, so in regards to a church, I think you'll find there are churches like my church all over the world, because I believe God made a promise to his church that he would look after it, that evil wouldn't prevail against it, that he'd send the Holy Spirit to guide us in all truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so God always has a faithful people, even when things look really bad for the church, or its public image is terrible, or it's perceived by maybe the media to be terrible, or whatever it may be, whether it's true or not. That's just perception. Or whether you have lots of false teachers in the church running rampant. There's always going to be faithful churches in their communities just putting their heads down and doing the work of the church, following Jesus. So I'm sure, like in the US, I'm sure there are many churches like-minded. It's just one of those things, right, where it's like they're not very loud.
No,
They're just doing their work, so you don't hear about them.
Sure.
But you will hear about the big mega church with their big online ministry.
Oh yeah.
And then you hear about, suddenly all these abuse cases or something, like.
Yeah.
And that's when people think of Christianity, that's what they think of, because that's online, that's in the media, that gets the attention, right? That represents them.
Oh, sure. The squeakiest wheel gets the grease, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, all the wheels that are working fine, doing their job, you don't worry about those,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
so I have a story just quickly. I think
Yeah.
it's a good one to put on the table here.
Sure.
And Levi, feel free to comment because I think it's relevant. We had a couple of Christian friends come round. I think it'd be a couple of weeks ago, and we're having a discussion about. I just asked them, "Well, what do you go to church?" And they were telling me where they go, etc. It wasn't part of where you go, and I said, "Well," and they just general. It just came up in general conversation. I said, "Well, I'm a self-declared atheist, and I've been treated what I think is very well by people in the Anglican Church there." And the comment was, "Oh, they only treat you like that because they see you as a potential convert. But if you're within the church and you do have doubts and stuff, they're going to treat you like a dog."
Oh, I think I said that to you too, Glenn. I mean,
did you? Maybe it was you,
as a possibility.
No, but we did have the friends here of a more out there denomination, and just sort of very suspicious about and very really critical of the way the church handles people who do have doubts. So I hadn't seen it where I am going there, but have you seen any of that yourself?
I haven't. That's actually that's a good thing to bring up. I think there is this perception among newer kind of, like you said, maybe more out there denominations. They do not have a very positive reception of traditional denominations like the Anglican Church. They've got a very negative outlook because they think, they're not great Christians there. I'd be careful, watch out. So it's coming from a place of genuine concern for you as their friend.
Yeah.
But I think always with stereotypes or assumptions, there's a reason they exist, right? Because unfortunately, those things have happened, but it's not generally the case. And but so I understand why people would say that. But I also I think it just goes back to before about saying how God always has his people, and how the church, sometimes things look good for the church and sometimes things don't. And that can happen too on a community level for just local churches. And I won't go into too much detail because some of this stuff is, gets quite personal in terms of, because local churches, there's always stuff.
Sure.
Wherever you go in communities, especially small towns. But in my church and in the diocese as a whole. So a diocese, for those who don't know, the Anglican Church is structured it's got provinces all around the world. So in the Australian Anglican Church, which are part of the global Anglican Church, it has dioceses all around the country, which are regions that a bishop oversees. And within his diocese, he's got priests who are in charge of parishes. So it's like a way of structuring the church, right? So in my diocese, there's some of this is quite well known. There's like a history of like a few decades ago of a lot of like in much of the church, there was abuse and also a lot of liberal teaching and really poor teaching as well. And things in the church in this diocese did not look very good, like just 6-7 years ago. As far as I understand, I'm new, so I will speak carefully because I'm new to the diocese. I've only been in the Anglican Church for a few years. But to my knowledge, through those who I've spoken to who have been here before what I've been used to, they're like, yeah, things were tough. Things were not looking good. So I can understand why people outside of the Anglican Church would have that perception of it, because that might be what they've known for a couple of decades. This is what this church was like, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that happens with the church. People will fall away. The leaders in the church, and this is where this is most concerning. Is what Jude warns about in his epistle. Is beware of false teachers, right? Because it's always the leadership in the church where you see the decline happen. Because it's led poorly, and there's abuse, corruption, false teaching, all these things enter into the church, and then the numbers people fall away from it. It just doesn't look good, right? But then God, in his goodness, will raise up faithful men to lead the church again, and things will turn around. And that's been the amazing thing in the diocese I'm a part of, and many around the country, I believe, where we're seeing that kind of change, like really positive change in the gospel being taught again, Christ's teachings being taught again, people really getting invested in their community to share the love of Jesus. And honestly, it's so exciting where the diocese I'm a part of. I actually work part-time for it just as about a year ago. There's being a part of it and seeing what's happening around this whole region. It's a big diocese when I'm a part of. It's 28 parishes, a big chunk of New South Wales. It's the I won't dox myself. Probably people can probably find me anyway, but it's the Bathurst diocese, right? So all of central west New South Wales, big area. So it's but a lot of good stuff's happening because God has raised up faithful people who are fixing the errors of of what happened in the past. So and this will happen from every denomination, every church in whatever area. This can happen, right? So my hope is that the church is in some areas is course correcting, right? And in other areas, unfortunately, it might be falling away, right? And unfortunately, this will happen from church to church. But the church is called to live out Jesus' teachings.
Yeah, agreed. So
I hope that answers your question, Glenn.
Thanks, because I'm fascinated by almost the contradiction we've had in the previous 3 broadcasts, where the faith in God is not shaken, but religion seems to be the core that's copping a hiding. And I just wondered if you could explain how your faith and religion seem to be, the way you express it, so compatible.
Yeah, I was keen to touch on this. That's why I cheekily chose the title for the video as a bit of a laugh, because I know on this show you often talk talk with people who have deconstructed their faith. Like they'll say, I still believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in religion.
Right.
And that's very interesting to me to say that. And my experience is kind of, in a way, I suppose you could say it's the opposite. It's why I chose the title Return to Tradition, is actually finding that, yes, there are problems with a lot of the conception of, or what we call modern Christianity today. Some of these things that deconstruction is, that's the right term, points out, that might be valid. The answer to it, I've found, is actually looking to the past, where the church, look at its teachings, look at the teachings of the church of how Christianity expressed itself historically. Look at the history of our religion, and of course there's lots of people will point out to bad things in our history as well, I'm sure. But if I look to the history of my faith, I'm really not ashamed at all to call myself religious, and I believe in this religion as long as it's a true and living religion. And this, I think, is an interesting conversation to have, because in James' epistle, so we get this term thrown at you, thrown around. I'm sure we've all heard it. It's a relationship, not a religion. And it's like, it's both. It's both. And as long as it's true religion, and what's true religion? Okay, we asked that question. What's true religion? Well, look at the epistle of St. James in the Bible, and he says true religion is this. It's looking after widows and orphans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's following the teachings of Jesus. That is true religion, and really, it's the only. It's the only true religion is Christ. It's the one true living religion, is the religion of Christianity, of following Jesus, because he's God. He made this universe. He made us. He entered into it, took on the form of a man, and died, so that we may have faith in him. So he created this religion, and it's a true and living one. It is a relational one. It's one where we have a deep and intimate relationship with the God that made us. And he calls us to live in light of what he did for us. He calls us to live in a certain way and to follow his teachings.
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid to call myself religious at all, as long as it has to be true and a living religion, one that you live out, right? One that you act out in your life. And is, So hopefully that is answers your question. Yeah.
That's really good, because what I've noticed at the church is that, what I always say to anyone there is, I don't care what you believe, demonstrate to me in the world by your actions what you believe. And you
Absolutely.
That's the only yardstick that I have in my position, probably, and for most people, is to see how you behave in the world.
Yeah.
There's no point being a total sort of hypocritical person, goes to church on Sunday and praises Jesus, and then comes out and does the opposite in the world. It just doesn't do any favors for religion at all.
No.
So I don't see that where I go. I see people who are authentic, and I think that's why I still go back to the socials and stuff like that, because I feel like they're people that I can trust to behave in a way that what those commandments say and what they see Jesus as professing is what they're playing out, I think. But obviously, from what I've seen in other situations, it doesn't happen at all. You just have people who are antagonistic, they're critical, they're judgmental, all of those negative things that tend to take people down rather than lift them up. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
Well, that's
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
that's the point, and I've got several things to say. So go ahead, Levi, and then I'll remember what I was going to say, and I'll go back to what you were talking about as far as religion is concerned.
Yeah, in this whole discussion, I always find the book of James is actually really helpful. I keep coming back to it because it has all these teachings about what the religion, what true religion is, what living as a Christian means, right? And he talks about this, like acting it out. You have to. He says, faith without works is dead.
Oh yeah, that's a real controversial one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, people, between Protestants and Roman Catholics, will debate about that in terms of, the theological implications of, how we're justified in God's eyes. And that whole discussion.
It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that, even, Levi, because
Yes.
there's two communities, as I see it, within at least American Christianity. Like I said, it may be different where you are, but it's the grace camp and the works camp. And they're fighting each other over whether it is indeed grace or whether it is indeed works. And then you have many people on the spectrum of either one. Either someone's more toward what people in the works camp would call greasy grace. It's just like, I can do anything I want. God's going to love me no matter what. And they're right. God will love you no matter what. I would agree with that. Then the other end on the works are people that just do works thinking that's going to save them. So from each end of the spectrum, the same as politics, left and right, you have people somewhere in the middle and then to each end, right? But it's the constant argument between these people. And to me, you see the religion in the way they tear each other down over their disagreement on whether it's works or grace is beside the point. It's how are you going to treat a person that disagrees with you, whether it's YouTube or in person or whatever. Obviously people are going to be more horrible, I would hope, on YouTube rather than if you're sitting in front of someone and you're having this discussion. But what I'm seeing is it's pretty prolific. The disagreement means to a lot of people that you can just say whatever you want, and you can stab someone in the front, stab them in the back, talk about them, say all these horrible things. And that is not the religion that you're referring to. That isn't following Christ. It isn't taking care of the widow, and it even brought to mind what Jesus said. I never knew you. Well, when did you?
Yeah.
When did we not?
Apart from me.
Right. Yeah. And Jesus' example is when you visited the prisoner in prison, when you clothed the naked, when you fed the hungry. That's when you did it unto me. And that's that ties in quite a bit to what James said. So there is a works component in here, but to me, the works is based on the love that you feel from the Holy Spirit, from deep inside you. And when you're embracing that, it helps you to walk it out. But what I keep seeing is people who are clinging to the religion part. And when I say religion, I mean the religion that is mean and hateful and angry and refuses to accept that people may not be the same as them. They may disagree with them, but they're still lovable. They're still loved by God, regardless of whether you think that they're living right or not. Their religion is one of arrogance and hatred towards people that don't agree with them. I can't be dissuaded from that. I've seen so much of it. I think for a long time, I got to the point where I was pretty jaded about it. I'm in a different place now. I mean, people are going to be the way they are. I'm not trying to change anybody. I'm not trying to tell people they need to believe like I believe. None of that. I'm on my own path, and I would hope that people would be on their own path. But what do you think about any of that? If there's a question there, I don't know.
Yeah, I often think when people say, when they critique religious people, the term they're actually looking for is legalists. Well, that's what they're critiquing, and so they're pointing at it like that is a problem. But what they mean is legalists, right? And as you pointed out, in Protestantism, you have the free grace guys, which are often called antinomians, and on the other side you have legalists. And yeah, it turns into I can do whatever I want because grace, and then on the other side it's like, no, you've got to work hard to earn your salvation, right? And we have this whole debate,
right?
And this kind of, I guess this touches neatly back into my story of coming to where I am in my faith now, and the title of the video too.
Yeah, great. Perfect.
I find why these people fall into these areas is because they've isolated themselves from traditional teaching of the church, of Christianity. And they're rehashing these debates or these things that have been settled a long time ago. Or if they haven't been debated before, they've just been, this was settled, right? We knew how to reconcile these two things. Because I find in most of these camps, they are not, like, often in these Protestant camps, they will likely often be in denominations that are not very rooted in the history of our faith at all. Whereas when I look back into history of our faith, into tradition, and I read things from, old dead guys who lived hundreds of years ago, and I find they write and teach very well on how we reconcile these things. And that's one of the things which is good in the Anglican Church, I found personally on this issue, is it has lots of good teaching on historical teaching, from men going back centuries. Yes, in the eyes of God, it is his grace alone that justifies us. That, there's nothing we can do to earn salvation from God. There's nothing we can do to merit that, right?
Yeah.
But that salvation that we're freely given is one. It is a living, lively faith. It will, if you've generally been transformed, you will live out your faith. And so there's two sides to the coin of salvation, right? You have to act out your faith. You have to do good works. As a Christian, that's what you're called to do. And Scripture warns us, if you don't do those things, then your faith is dead. And so Scripture often speaks, I find, in a way in which it's like focusing in on this central point. So when, like, Paul talks about how we're justified in the eyes of God, he's trying to get that across to us. So he's saying, this is how we're saved, not of our own works, purely of grace. And then James is talking to people. He's saying, you have to act out your faith. You have to follow the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
If you don't act it out, then do you even have a real living faith? So they're both true. And I found traditional teaching reconciles these two truths really well. And that comes, you might think, okay, how does that? Not every Christian is going to have the time to dig into read these old books, and not every Christian is interested in that either. But it'll flow out. That teaching will flow out into their everyday teaching that they are sitting under from their priest and their lay leaders and their Bible studies. That teaching is going to they're going to be absorbed into it. It's going to be common knowledge. Hopefully, if the leaders in the church are sticking to the traditional teaching on these issues, well, then you're not going to have these problems, because they're sticking to the scriptural teachings, what the Bible teaches ultimately, and they're teaching it faithfully. And so you're not going to have these problems of legalism or antinomianism these two opposite extremes when people are taught when they're taught properly.
All right.
Levi, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but or anyone correct me if I got it wrong. I'm seeing works really described in two different ways. One is how you described it, Levi. It's really just enacting out the teachings, and there's the other side of this where people are doing it to ingratiate themselves with God, which to me seems like such opposite ends of the scale. Is that a fair comment or not?
Yeah, that I think that's fair. Yeah, it's like what's the motivation for doing those good works, right? Is it sometimes it's not even ingratiating yourself with God. It's looking good in the eyes of your fellow man,
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be the motivation for people doing really good stuff. Unfortunately, it can actually be they're doing all these good works in the community because they love the attention and the praise that they get, and it puffs up their ego, right?
Yeah.
Fair point.
So a lot of people, that's why they do it. For some, I shouldn't say a lot, but that happens, right?
Yep. Yeah, it sure does.
So where's the church at the moment, Levi, in terms of just generally? How's it progressing? Because I know it's very important to you personally that has a strong youth group, a strong, generational awareness of that. That a lot of the people there are going to be well passed on in another 10 years or 15 years. So what do you see a positive outlook for the church going forward from the younger ones?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. It's interesting coming into like a more traditional church during this time, because as I if you look at some other more evangelical or Pentecostal churches, and then you think, oh, that's where a lot of young people are in those churches, and you look at more traditional ones, and they just don't have as many young people. I'm in an interesting case where only just in the past year have a lot of other younger people started coming to church, and the numbers are balancing out a bit, which is exciting, right? And that's because God's at work, and as long as we trust Him, He's going to keep the church. As long as we're being faithful as well, I think He's going to keep the church alive, and that may not even. I hope that He will keep the expression of Christianity that is the Anglican Church alive, because I believe it to be the most faithful expression of Christianity, of its historical teaching, of its biblical, of the Bible. I believe it to be the best representation of those things. But even if it be God's will that this denomination does no longer exist in some time, then or if it changes or something in a good way, right? In that
Right.
Not changes in a bad way. God's going to keep the church, His church, alive. And so when it comes to younger people, I'm optimistic that young people are going to be interested still. That because and you need younger people. As long as younger people can plant themselves in communities and commit, not be afraid to commit themselves to a community and plant roots,
Sure.
and commit themselves to a local church as well. I think it's kind of like both older people need to be, if they want this church, right, that they've been a part of for generations, that they grew up in, if they want it to continue, they have to be receptive and gracious towards younger people. And then I think younger people also have to go out of their way a bit too to commit themselves to a local church. Like, okay, say in Australia we do a lot of driving. We're quite sparsely. If you live in the country, a lot of the centres, the towns are quite spread out. So you might have a young family. You might move out to You might live in a community, you might move out there, and there might be a lot of Christians around. But there's a local church, but it's just got some oldies there. They're nice, but there's no other young families or anything. I'm going to travel 2 hours to the big town where there's a big, thriving church there. I'm going to be part of that. And I'll go there on a Sunday. And I understand, like, my family, we did that for a little bit, actually. But I think also for younger people, we've got to go out of our comfort zone a little bit too and commit ourselves to local churches, whatever it may be. As long as it's a faithful church, if it's a good church, if the people, and of course, right, if the people are welcoming and willing to be challenged and willing to change their ways and willing to welcome you and have you part of their family, then you should, I think younger people need to be a bit more bold as well and say, okay, this might not be super comfortable, maybe a little bit awkward at first, but I'm going to commit to this, and hopefully that will bring in change. Because this is the example in our church is families, various young families have, and also older couples as well at the church that I know, have chosen, instead of going somewhere else, they've chosen to commit here because this is their local church. And in God's providence, it's just happened to be that a lot of people have decided to make this decision independently, and all ended up.
Excuse me, sorry to butt in. I've just got to step out in case you ask me something, because Sandra needs my help fast. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, good. That's fine, Glenn. Yeah. So. Yeah. So and that's often sometimes if you take that first step, others will follow. I think that's how the church, when it comes to answering Glenn's question about younger people, and is there an interest from younger people? I'm optimistic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love your optimism, and I'm not a pessimist, and I think when someone starts, I wish there were a better word to describe what I've gone through other than deconstruction, because I don't see it. I don't know another word for it. I feel like I have deconstructed some of the things that I have seen for many, many years that don't work. And most of it relates to how the church in general, doing air quotes you can't see, seems to treat unbelievers and people that don't agree with them. If I had to boil it down to anything, that would be my biggest concern. And I don't have to participate in that. I know that. And I don't have to say anything about it. I could just keep my criticisms to myself and just not share it. But in sharing that and feeling a peace come over me that I didn't have before, because I'm no longer a part of the religious part. Now, the way you're describing religion is more what I would embrace if it were something that was happening. And you mentioned the early church fathers, and not so much them as much to me, but the church that I believe Paul started, some of the churches Paul started. Now, we know from scripture they had some of the same issues back then as we do today. We had people that got puffed up in their knowledge and started, trying to rule over people and thinking they were, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I'm this, I'm that, they had the same issues. And that's why I believe Paul seems so repetitive in his letters, because he had to keep hitting the same things again and again. It reminds me of Jesus saying, how long must I stay with you? When are you guys going to get it? But there seemed to be a way that the early church lived with each other, and taking care of the widows and taking care of those people that couldn't work, making sure they had food. People would, pool their money together to help someone, I'm for lack of another example, if the wheel on their cart broke and they needed to get to work or whatever, in today's standard, it's like an unwed mother her car breaks down. Now, I would like to see a church that would pull the money together rather than building a bigger building to be in, or a nicer cathedral, or a coffee station at the church, that they would put the money to help people that really need it, that are really struggling.
Mm.
That to me would be, in many ways, the way you're describing, I believe, the way you view what you consider to be religion. That'd be true religion to me. It'd be truly following what Christ taught. I don't see it. I mean, overall, I don't see it. But I'm not responsible for anyone else. As I mentioned earlier, I know I can't change anyone else's mind. I'm not trying to do that. I'm responsible for the way I live. I'm responsible for the way I treat other people and the way I love or don't love. That's on me. It's my responsibility. I don't put it on demons. I don't put it on the church. Someone made a comment on one of the videos, one of the deconstruction videos. He says, how long are we going to keep blaming the church and the Bible for our own plight? And I found it so interesting because I do talk about the things I don't like about the church and the things that led me to this decision to break away from that part of it. But I think it's interesting that person made that comment, because it's like he didn't listen to anything I said, because I didn't blame the church. I was talking about the real issues that I saw in the church, but I talked a lot about personal responsibility. Even in people blaming demons, well, I did this, or I backslid because Satan tempted me. No, you can be tempted with all sorts of things in the same way you can be tempted to do good, but you're the one that makes the decision. This is the way I see it. You're the one that makes the decision, so it's on you, each person. So when they treat people like they do, they're responsible. I mean, they can blame anything else. I'm not trying to blame anyone. I have for a long time wished, the way you described, I'd love community. I'm a big sociology person and psychology person. I love community. I grew up in a community, and over the years, and they've done studies about this, community it's not gone, but it's really dissipated. Back when I was a little kid, the church that my grandparents went to, when they had an unwed mother, or they had an elderly person who needed food, they took care of it. They just took care of it. They didn't, talk about, okay, you pay this half. No, they took care of it. They made sure that people were taken care of. And then over the years, as I got older, I would see these people. I would know these people that went to the church, and they were telling me about what they were struggling with. And I would say, what is the church doing to help? He says, oh, I went to the pastor, and he told me I need to read my Bible more. This is the kind of thing. This is the reason why people are deconstructing, quote unquote, in the first place. People have had enough. But what I hear you saying, I have a lot of hope for that. A world where the older folks that have been in the church for a longer time can make room for the younger folks, and the younger folks can open themselves up to learn something from the old folks, and they can work together and be rooted in a community. I think that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. I think to touch on what you said about, look at the book of Acts, and you read about the early, like the first churches, right? You're like, oh, it's incredible. Look what they did.
Yeah.
And then you compare, you look at the church today, and you're like, oh, it pales.
Yeah.
In comparison.
Yeah.
I think you also talked about, you also talked about, we're just not seeing those same things happening, or you might, maybe in your childhood you did, but now you're not.
Right.
I think there's a number of factors. There's so many factors today. I think in the book of Acts, it's unique because the early church, they had the apostles. So they're direct. These men knew Jesus, and they were given the task from Jesus himself to plant the church, to sow the seeds of the church, which led to, which we trace back to today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're us today, Christians today, are the fruit of that work in Asia Minor there in the first century.
Sure.
Right? We're the fruit of that work, of those faithful men and women, those first Christians. And so the apostles, right, the 12 apostles, the direct friends of Jesus, to lead them and teach them. And so we saw all these amazing things happen, right? The work of the in their communities, how they transformed, and also how they debated people as well, and challenged false ideas and false teaching.
Sure. Paul was really good at that. He would talk about
has continued on, but not always in the same way. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think I thought you had stopped talking, but you
What was
hadn't.
that? Sorry, Jason.
Can you hear me okay? Levi? Hello?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. All I was what I was going to say. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
There might be a lag in the internet again.
Well, it's been doing good the whole night.
Yes.
But
Yep. Hear you loud and clear.
All right. Go ahead, Levi.
Yeah, it was doing well. Hey. Yeah, as I was saying, so we've been given a task to run the race, right? That Paul, and the apostles started.
Yeah.
And the church has done that, not perfectly, but successfully, because we wouldn't be here otherwise, right?
Yeah, that's true.
We wouldn't. Today, in the modern context, we've got the difficulty in. Generally, the church is in an interesting time today because we live in a modern age, like post-modernity. It's an interesting. The church is still trying to find its place in the world today, and there's a lot of hostility towards the church, and the church, much of the church cannot do the work that it used to do because it simply is not. For various reasons, for some reason, the government they think that's for the best, and that's why they do it. And people will point to, oh, look what the church did here, look at what they did wrong here in the past. So therefore,
Levi? Levi, you still with us? I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Hello? All right, guys, we might have lost the connection. Levi's still in the studio, but it's not pulsating. It doesn't look like he's talking. I can't hear him. We'll give him another minute and see. Levi, if you can hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can. Okay. Can you back up a little bit, because I think
sorry. What was the last thing I said?
You were talking about the modernity and the church. You mentioned that the church can't do what it used to do, and then you mentioned the government, and I think that's all I caught. You're basically saying the church can't do the same things anymore.
Okay.
They're trying to find themselves in modern times, the way things are now.
Yeah. I think the way things are now, right? The what I was saying was the government has stepped in and is doing a lot of the things today which the church used to do.
Right. There we go. Yeah.
In terms of welfare, right? Because there was a time where welfare was done entirely by the church.
Yeah.
And that was what the church did, and the government, the state, whatever form that may have took, it had other issues like, defense, securing the borders of their nation,
Right.
establishing law and order, right, and ruling. That was the role of the state, and the role of the church was to do things like, look after widows and orphans, feed the poor,
Sure.
look after the sick. That's what
Sure.
the church did that. But now, not only does, and in principle, I'm not opposed to government welfare. I'm not entirely opposed to that, actually, but there is also the fact that the government makes it harder for the church to do welfare as well. There are limitations on what the church can do. But that's a whole. That adds a whole other dimension to the church doing its job in the world today. I find it might be different in the US, maybe, but I know here in Australia, there's a lot of legislation and red tape and things you have to work through to do things today, to do what the church used to do. We just can't. The church can't do it in the same capacity it used to. So I think that's a big part of it. But I also certainly you still have churches where they could do more than what they're actually doing. They're not doing enough. I'm sure there's many cases like that. But yeah, I'll just say that I think the modern world that we live in, the relationship between the civil authority and the church, that makes it very difficult.
Maybe that is true where you are, but what I see is that all these churches you mentioned, mega churches, especially, I know there are small, poor churches, right? I'm not talking about them, but these 501c mega churches that put their money towards building bigger churches and buying the pastor $1 million home and nice cars, and the people that are going to the church and they're putting money in the collection plate and they get laid off and they've got 4 kids to take care of. And my question is, where's the church? And I don't expect you to answer this, Levi. I'm just making a point that, I'm not trying to take away from your point about the government, red tape. I trust that that's what it's like where you are. But I don't see the government preventing these big mega churches with their $1 million homes and their really nice cars from helping an unwed mother who her car broke down or she needs childcare so she can go to work. I don't see it that way. I see a lot of mega pastor teachers, especially, doing very, very well and being arrogant about it from the pulpit, talking about how, there are some that are worse than others. There are, celebrity pastors, for instance, with jets and that's obviously the really bad end of it. But even under that, I don't want to see these things. I would rather not be able to talk about it because it isn't happening. But it's a reality.
Yeah, that's right.
Here, it's a reality that I have seen over and over and over again, and it is so far away from what you describe. And it's not that I don't think it can change. I would love for it to change. Frankly, I miss the fellowship part of church. I really do. I miss potlucks. That's one of the things I miss the most is getting together and breaking bread with other believers and laughing a little bit and sharing stories and things like that. I miss that because that's what I grew up with. I grew up going to those sorts of things. But I find at this point in my life, I find it very difficult to turn a blind eye and enjoy my potluck while I know that the church is taking care of their leadership and not taking care of the flock that they're sworn to protect. Jesus gave the command to go into the world and preach all the gospel, but he also, in calling people to ministry, I think I think it's a pretty big call to say God called you to be a pastor, and then when you're a pastor, you're concerned about your own coffers and not doing the work of taking care of your sheep. I mean, Jesus said to Peter, "Do you love me?" He asked him 3 times. Yes. Feed my sheep. It's so simple to me on the surface. It's just so simple. Take care of your flock. If you're going to be a pastor, if you're going to call yourself a Christian leader, all I'm asking is for them to do what Jesus said to do. That's it. And I'm not the judge. I do have an opinion, but nobody's listening to me. But I can't help but see that. So what you're describing is like a utopia or something, comparatively speaking to what I've seen. It's like night and day.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Levi.
Yeah, that's and this goes back to the title of the video, and it's fitting. The return to tradition.
Yeah.
I'll be as bold to say, maybe a bit spicy, but these mega churches and stuff, I think that they're a fad and that they're going to die, and I hope that's the case. I hope that the mega churches die out.
Yeah.
Because they have left a really bad stain upon Christ's bride, on the church. They left a really bad stain on it.
Yeah.
The mega church, just the abuses. And so what I would love to see is people return to more traditional churches and the mega church whole system of one man who's his own pope, and he has a supreme and he just starts his brand new denomination all by himself, and he's his own pope. He's got no accountability.
Right.
When we have to realize that this structure is not working, because time and time again, you mentioned cases in the US. It's happened here as well in big mega churches in Australia, where the head pastor, the big lead pastor, who basically is like a bishop or a pope. It turns out, or there's these corruption cover-ups or abuse cover-ups, or there was really dodgy stuff going on. It's like in America, they have big names, all these big guys who, like the worst examples, like the Kenneth Copelands, honestly, I think that man's like, he's demon possessed, I think.
Oh yeah, you can see it in his eyes.
That's right. It's the eyes, right? The eyes are crazy.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see it.
Because he gets confronted about this, doesn't he? In some interview about his private jet.
Yeah, Inside Edition.
He looks at the woman with this. Yeah, he looks at the reporter with this crazed look in his eyes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a really good example.
Yeah. So I think it's a huge issue.
So Levi, this is what I think is good about doubt. I mentioned earlier that I had a different perspective on it, and it ties into what we're talking about. I think I agree with you about the megachurches, 100%, no hesitation whatsoever. I would also like to see them die away. I would love for it to be small groups of people, community churches, that are clinging to what got them there in the first place and working together as a community. I would be a part of that in a heartbeat. And I think that doubt, believe it or not, when people doubt and they, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, deconstruct from what isn't working, where are they left to go other than to reconstruct something better? Because that's what I'm doing. I can't speak for everyone else, but that's where I'm not in a place of blind, grope around in the dark trying to find something else to believe in. No, I already know what I believe. My belief in God hasn't changed. My belief in Christ hasn't changed. I just don't believe in the church as it is now, in general. I would love to even be a part of seeing something change. I would be the first one to line up if things were different. And then, I hear in the back of my head, well, be the change you want to see. Well, that's exactly what I'm doing. I have to put my own mask on first. I'm recovering from what people in present Christianity would call church hurt. It's like this phrase you have church hurt. You're angry at the church for what they've done to you, like the comment that the guy made on my. Oh, we lost him. We'll see if he comes back. It's a wonderful conversation we're having with Levi. I hope that someone listening has been able to get something out of it. Glenn had to take care of his wife, and my wife, her tummy hurts, so she wasn't able to stay on tonight, which we completely understand. I think she's trying to get some rest. She had a really long week. She works so hard. We both do. We both work hard, as I'm sure a lot of people do. It's a lot. All right. Hey, Levi, let's try you again.
Hey, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Good. Sorry about that. I swapped over to my my phone hotspot. Internet in the office wasn't working.
No problem at all. No problem at all. I don't know how much you heard of what I was saying, but I was just agreeing with you about the mega churches. I said what I would like to see is the mega churches to go away. I agree with you there, and it to be small community churches that are loving God with everything, loving their neighbor as themselves, which to me includes loving themselves, not in a narcissistic way, but understanding that they are precious to God with their flaws, not without them. I mean, the way that they are. Yes, of course, we want people to enjoy the fruits of the Spirit, and to choose to walk in the Spirit and not the flesh. I mean, of course, that's a whole nother conversation. But I would love to see that. I would be first to volunteer to be a part of something like that. I'm going to think of a better word than deconstruction. I've been saying deconstruction / reconstruction, but I think there is something, at least for me, I'll only speak for myself. For me, deconstruction and breaking away from the parts of the present day church that I do not want to be a part of anymore. And then what I'm left with is just me and God. And what kind of person am I going to be? I'm not listening to a certain pastor telling me that I need to do this and need to do that. And that's a real problem for a lot of people in the church, because they have taken the idea of ecclesia and made it into, you need to go to a brick and mortar church, otherwise you're disobedient. Which goes back to thinking that, they met when Paul was around. They met in small churches. There wasn't a quote unquote church or synagogue that they went to. They were small churches from what I've studied and what I understand. And I would like to see it go back to that. Not to say you can't have a church building, but a small community church, like from what I understand, the church that you are working with seems to be. That would be fantastic. And people actually following the words of Christ and living like he lived, like I think it was during Paul's day. And obviously I agree that we've gotten way far from that, but I don't look at the movement of deconstruction necessarily as a bad thing, because that's how these mega churches will go down. When people stop, glad handing these rich pastors and stop showing up, and then looking into themselves. I can't guarantee they're all doing that, but that's what we're doing. And it's not to just be angry at the church and say, well, I was hurt by the church, so I'm just not going to have anything to do with it. No. I want something more, is what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, because I don't know all the details of your story when it comes to deconstruction, but I know that the perception I have of it, from what I've seen, is like I'm very wary of it. And it seems so much of it is motivated by anger towards the church, or even just justification. They're trying to reconcile a sinful lifestyle with their faith. So they just deconstruct what the Bible teaches. They really just do away with it and say, "Oh, I still believe in Jesus, but I don't actually follow anything he teaches." Sometimes
Well, that's not.
the deconstructions they seem to be like that. But I notice in your case, that's not the case.
No, not at all. I didn't identify with any of that. I'm not angry. I have been in the past angry. Sure. I admit to being angry at some of the things that happened to me in various churches. Of course, but I'm far past any of that now. I've been healed and recovered from any kind of anger. I have. I do admit I don't like the way some so-called Christians treat other Christians. I've stated that clearly. I don't like seeing that, but I don't think God likes that either. No, but yeah, that's the problem too with this deconstruction, in my opinion, is that the mainstream Christian church reaction to it is similar. And I'm not saying that what you said was bad or wrong, but that's what they think too. They think, oh, well, you just want to sin more. That's the reason. Oh, and you were never saved to begin with. You weren't a real Christian. And that's just not true. For most people that I've personally talked to, that is not true. It's not just about the amount of Bible they know. It's about their relationship with God was real to them. They believe in him. They, invited Jesus into their heart, and they lived a Christian life, quote unquote. So it's not for everyone. It's not that they just want to sin, so they're throwing out the whole Bible and saying, "Oh, this doesn't work for me anymore." And it's not that. What was the other point? Oh, throw out the Bible and that they just want to sin. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, I'm not saying by any stretch that I'm a sinless person, but I've long since any habit of sin that I used to have. Again, not saying I'm perfect, but I'm not struggling in that area. I'm married, and my wife and I treat each other with love and compassion and dignity and kindness, and very much the fruits of the Spirit that Paul lists. These are things that are important to me, that I uphold these things, and they're very much they're Christian morals and values that I have grown up with and that have been instilled in me since I was 5 years old. It's just the other stuff that I see happening that I don't want any part of. That's it. That's really the bottom line for me. And you can't really cover someone's whole story in 2 hours. I mean, I talked
that's right.
a little bit about a lot of things, but there's a lot more under the surface, and I may revisit some of that, and some of it, like having this conversation with you. I've said some things that I didn't cover in my own broadcast that I did, and more is going to come out. The more we talk to people and hear people's stories, the more I'm going to have an opportunity to get some things out there. But
yeah. Do you mind if I respond to what you said about deconstruction?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving your take on your experience and what that has been like for you, because it's interesting how you mentioned at the beginning, like maybe finding a different term, because what I found, this goes back to this idea of like false teachers, wolves in sheep's clothing. What they do is they prey on people who are vulnerable and who have genuine issues with the bad things that are happening in the church. And I think the problem I have with the deconstruction movement is not with individuals like yourself, but with people. I see them on Twitter, I see them on YouTube, who've got big followings. Deconstructionists, kind of really progressive, in quotes, Christians.
Yeah.
Who I believe they're preying on people people like yourself gave your story of how you've seen these genuine issues in the church that you do not like, and you're like, I don't want a part of that.
Yeah.
Where do I go? Where do I find the real expression of Christianity? Well, then these people come along, wolves in sheep's clothing, whispering, like, oh, I'm affirming you. I hear what you're saying. But then there's all this baggage that they bring with, you have to get on board with all this other stuff as well. And it's leading people astray.
Yeah.
So praise God that's not, from what I hear, that's not, the case with yourself.
No.
And then it's always good to take these things individual basis, right? But I think broadly as a movement, that's why I'm quite skeptical and very caution people against using that label, because of many of the actors I see who are leading that, or who are the spokespeople of that movement.
I don't disagree with you at all. That's why I don't like the word. I don't know yet what other word. I think that it will be revealed to me at some point. I'll come to a better way to describe it. And you're absolutely right.
Maybe Reformation.
Oh, I love that. Reformation is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. That's sorry to butt in. But
no,
that's the kind of story of Christianity, right? And that's what happened in the 1500s. Was the church there was corruption in the church. There were abuses happening in the church.
Yeah.
And some men decided that's enough, and we're going to take action against this. And they didn't do that by appealing to the spirit of the age and deconstructing what had come before, what had been taught before. But they did that by going back by returning to what was taught before, returning to the faith, returning to what Scripture teaches and what faithful men before them had taught. So the church will often go through these moments where they need to realize there's temptation to drift. You have corruption and abuses, and then you have Satan. He sends in his workers to take advantage of the corruption or abuses that are happening in the church, to take advantage of that, to lead people away from Jesus. So that's always what will happen. Like in the Reformation, there were movements who were like some of these radical deconstructionist guys today. There were movements back then who jumped on board the Reformation, and they were radical. And they were, what they were teaching was wrong. They were going into another extreme. So yes, I think Reformation, reforming, returning to what has worked, returning to what we know has worked, because we've seen it happen, like you mentioned right in the book of Acts.
I love it.
I think that's the answer. Not deconstructing it, but reforming and returning to
I love
a living
it.
expression of that faith.
Yeah, thank you, Levi. I'm going to consider that even more.
Good. Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm glad to.
Levi, we have one question from the chat. I wonder if you would answer a question, and then I think we've kept you long enough. We try to keep it around between an hour and a half and 2 hours. We'd love to have you back on if you feel like you have more to add, but I think you've covered a lot of good ground here, and we have a baseline for future discussion, at least is the way I see it. But Christy asks, she says, I'm curious what he feels about the fear the church uses to gain believers, as in telling them without the sinner's prayer they'll be in hell. And then the follow-up question from her is, are the fruits of the Spirit enough?
Yes. So first, I'll pull up the live chat on YouTube.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the fear the church uses to gain believers. yeah, if it comes to saying, okay, you have to say this prayer to there's this method that you have to use. I'm very much against that. You see that in various denominations or expressions of Christianity where you have to say the sinner's prayer, or you have to come up to the altar, and there's this method that you have to do to be genuinely saved, and then all this really intense fruit checking afterwards to make sure were you really actually saved that time?
Yeah.
Did you really mean it? Did you mean it enough when you said the sinner's prayer?
Yes.
And this, again, going back to the topic, this is where traditional Christianity is so good for the soul, and it's been good for me in this area, is that I receive continual reassurance, not by, did I say that the right way? Did I go through the motion correctly? Did I really mean it when I asked Jesus to forgive me that last time? I thought I meant it then, but maybe now, retrospectively, I didn't mean it then, and it just gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm reminded every day that Christ loves me. So not through reading the Bible. And then every Sunday at church, I have the word of God proclaimed to me, the promises of God given to me. And then I'm given the sacraments as well. I am baptized into Christ. I have my baptism to look to for reassurance of faith. I have communion to constantly be reminded every time I take communion of what Christ died for me. He shed his body and blood for me.
Yeah.
And that's the incredible thing about the word and sacrament is it's God reminding. I'm not being introspective and constantly just being anxious and being full of anxiety about, am I doing this right or this? Am I following the recipe properly? To be, am I doing all the right? Am I taking all the right steps?
Right.
I'm looking to God for my assurance in my faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking to God in the signs that He has given me. He's telling me, no, you're my child. I redeemed you. And I think, the paradox of that is when you find that and when you're constantly fed by the word and by the sacraments of the church, then you are encouraged to express the fruits of the Spirit, to do good works, to do those good things that we're called to do as Christians, because you don't have the distraction of introspection and constant doubt over the status of your salvation, or whether did I do it? Do I need to be baptized again because I didn't mean it the first time? All that kind of silly stuff. That's all. It's if you're being reminded the right way about God's promises to you, then that's not. Then I think that'll help those issues. So I hope that answered Christy's question. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, well, I think you covered some of it. I think one of the parts of it was about the fear of hell, and I mean, you addressed the sinner's prayer part, and that you don't agree with the formula that's used for that, and I would agree with you there too. I mean, I know people, when you ask them how many times they got saved, some of them 10, 15 times, and they kept rededicating their life over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And for me, I didn't really struggle with that. I believed when I accepted Christ the first time that was all it took. But it wasn't me I trusted. I didn't trust that I was some great person. I trusted the Savior. I trusted that if He says, come to me, and I do, and it wasn't a fake conversion. I mean, people can say whatever they want about me. That's fine. I know for me it was real, and that hasn't changed. I haven't cast off my salvation like a cloak that I don't like anymore. No. It only takes the one time, and I haven't. I mean, people have tried to force me to question by judging my actions. Like, I was very rebellious in my 20s, my early 20s, and I went to bars, and this isn't something I'm happy about or bragging about. I'm just being honest about where my life went for a while. I was very disillusioned with the church back then, and for different reasons. And I was very much judged for that. Well, you're not saved because you drink, or you're not saved because you hang around unbelievers. I mean, I've heard it all. I've heard it all, and it just is a bunch of garbage. Like I don't stand before anyone but God when I die. I'm standing before Christ. He's the one I have to answer to. He's the one that can say, even if I think I've done everything right, he can say, you missed the mark. And I expect to hear that before, well done, good and faithful servant. I expect judgment is very painful, even for the believer, even if they go into it thinking, hey, I'm saved, so I don't have to worry about hell. But it's still, when I think about it, my knees are a little weak. Because you're standing before the God of the universe. You're standing before this all-knowing, ever-present, all-powerful being.
It's a
I
pretty
don't know.
terrifying thought.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So but I feel like knowing that it's a terrifying thought and having that attitude that, look, this is a big deal. I want to be able to stand in front of him and say, hey, I know that I wasn't perfect. I know that I sinned. I made mistakes. I did things that I knew were wrong. But I always kept coming back to this same place where I desired to do your will. I wanted in my heart. Of course, then they say the heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? But for lack of a better term, in my heart, he has to know that my desire is to be a good son, and to love people the way he wants me to love. That's our prayer every night. Jen and I pray every night. Continue to show us how to love others as you would have us love. It's beautiful to me. I think it's wonderful, and it touches my heart that that's something that is important to us. And all this other stuff that they add to it, I don't think is important. I don't have any problem with communion or the sacraments or any of the things that you mentioned. That's all wonderful. But some of the stuff that they put on people within present day Christianity, the hyper vigilant focus on sin all the time, when I think the focus shouldn't be as much on the crucifixion, but on the resurrection. It's how did God change us because of what he did, more so than, hey, we're still worried about all the sin and things. It's not to the point of me saying that sin doesn't matter at all. I'm just saying it just seems like everyone's so focused on everyone else's sin, and it's the whole beam in your own eye thing. I mean, that's what I see, is people concerned about what everyone else is doing. That's what I've experienced, instead of people focusing on themselves. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Levi, do you have any closing comments? I think it's time to wrap it up. And do you feel like you have anything else to share this time around? And just know that if there was anything, we had a guest on last week. I don't know if you had a chance to listen, but Christy, the one that asked the question, I told her, this is her first time doing anything like this, and I told her, you're gonna think of things afterwards that you wish you would have said. And so we're gonna have her back. Yeah, we're gonna have her back on, so she can touch on some of the things she wished she had shared. And I invite you to do the same thing. If after tonight you think of things you wish you would have said, you're more than welcome to come back anytime. But do you have any closing words?
Thanks, Jason. No, not really. I think I've said, I've covered what I was hoping to talk about.
Okay.
It's been good. I hope that it was an interesting conversation. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I do too. Yeah, I'm glad you were willing
is
to
there
come
actually
on.
Is there anything? No, thank you. Is there anything Glenn wanted to ask me or anything before we go?
He's here, so go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I am back.
If he's
just
back.
only for a few minutes. We've averted another catastrophe. We're having to call AAA. Levi knows what that is. That's your.
Oh, good. Oh no.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, yeah. That's another day. No. No, I think that you covered it really well. No doubt things will pop up in our general conversations, which I enjoy having and in that church environment. So all I can say is it really gladdens me to see the younger ones not closed off and are more than willing
Right.
to listen to questions,
Right.
have discussions, give a point of view, listen to what others have to say. I think it enhances their faith dramatically, in my opinion. So,
Agreed.
particularly when I've seen, when you just related then to the fear, I've seen on the YouTube and in listening to shows, etc., that so many people create their fear of hell, and all they do is create hell on earth for themselves, and it's
Yep.
really sad, in my opinion.
Yep.
So thanks, Levi.
What's that?
No, thanks, Glenn.
No, thanks,
for
Levi. Yeah, it's
inviting
been
me.
great to have you on, and I think not that a perspective from someone not in a deconstruction site is
Right.
very beneficial to anyone who's listened to this.
Yep. I really appreciate it,
Yeah.
Levi. Thank you again for being willing to come on the broadcast. Thank you. I hope you felt comfortable. I hope that anything I shared, you didn't feel like anything was a personal attack against you. I tried very hard to
Not
separate.
at all.
All right. Levi, stick around when I end the broadcast. We'll the three of us will talk for just a second before we go away. So just hang tight for a minute as I close up, if you would.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for anyone that's listened to the playback, and thank you for the few people that showed up in the chat. As I said at the beginning of the broadcast, we know that a change in format, we're going to lose certain people that don't want to hear this sort of thing, which I understand. And we're grateful that we had a non-deconstruction story. Again, if you want to come on the broadcast and tell your story, you're more than welcome. It doesn't have to be about a spiritual journey. It can be a funny story about something that happened to you when you went to the amusement park. It can be a road trip that you liked or a beautiful place that you visited and you want to share that with others. It can be, you struggled with some personal issue, sickness or whatever, and how you got through that. Really, any kind of story we're interested in hearing. We started with deconstruction because that's something that is going on in the world right now. As Levi mentioned, there are a lot of deconstruction people out there that have a lot of followings. Of course, that's not us. But there are plenty of people out there and doing this, and it's a popular topic. So we wanted to cover it and give people a safe place to be able to talk about their story and what has happened to them. And hopefully I've provided that. And I'll continue to work on that. I'm sure I'm going to learn more as I go forward. And thank you to Glenn for being willing to be here tonight and for inviting Levi to come on. All right. So we'll be back again next Friday. Next Friday, we'll have Christy back on to retouch on a few things that she felt like that she wanted to cover from the week before. And then we've got a couple other people that have emailed me or messaged me and want to tell their stories. So we have they're lining up slowly but surely. People are wanting to come forward and tell their story. So I'm grateful for that. All right, everyone, have a great weekend. Be safe out there and love yourself and love others. It's super important. All right, we'll see you next time on True Story Live. Good night and God bless.